So welcome to day 33 of our spiritual spring training. You may notice something different in the church, that the statues are covered. You may say, well, why do we do that? And so it's to say, okay, the Easter Vigil is 2 weeks away, and it's the sense of, being deprived of these physical aspects of our faith to bring about the glory of what we're going to experience in 2 weeks on Easter Sunday. And at the Easter Vigil, 2 weeks from tonight, we'll have 8 of our friends here with us that will be baptized at the Easter Vigil. And so that's why we read the readings from year A. We do what's called scrutinies, where it's this rite in the church where we're walking with our elect, those who are about to be baptized, and there's special readings in year A from the Samaritan woman at the well 2 weeks ago. Last week we had the healing of the blind man, and now we have the raising of Lazarus. And so I want to talk about the 3 things today are the 3 people that Jesus raised from the dead. And as I'm talking about them, think about this in terms of not just raising people from physical death, but spiritual death. And so the first one is Jairus' daughter. The second one is the widow's son of Nain. And then the third, of course, is Lazarus. I'll focus mainly on Lazarus. But if you look at these 3 raisings from the dead, these resurrections, if you will, St. Augustine wrote something that I really found interesting this week. He said, these are kind of like the progression of sin in our lives. So he says that Jairus' daughter, remember, she was a young girl. She died in her room inside the house. And St. Augustine said, she is a symbol of sin that's concealed and hasn't yet manifested in outward actions. So you think about that in your own life, how sin always begins inside of us, right? It can begin with a thought process. It can begin with an internal desire. Eventually, if we're not, in control of our passions, that sin then starts to pour out into actions, into sinful actions. But that's why at the beginning of Mass, when we do the Confiteor, we say, I'm sorry for what I've done and what I've said, what I haven't done, in my thoughts and in my actions. So sin is not just something that I do, but it also starts in the mind and in the heart. So the first one, if you think about Jairus' daughter, think about, what are my sinful thought patterns? I remember my spiritual director saying once, he said, your thought patterns are just a dress rehearsal for when the opportunity presents itself, you're going to fall to sin. And so if you're constantly thinking about something that's sinful, it's just a matter of time before it's going to pour out into actions. And so Mother Teresa would say, may we flee from the near occasion of sin. And that near occasion always begins in our mind. So even when the thoughts come, have a plan to say, I'm going to offer a prayer, some kind of sacrifice. That's why we fast during Lent and throughout the year, so that these thought patterns don't start to come out in actions. The second one is the widow's son. So remember this was a widow. Obviously, her husband is dead. She has one son. Now he is dead. And Jesus goes to Nain. If you ever go to the Holy Land, we go to that town where this happened. And you could imagine the heart of Jesus thinking, wow, this is going to be his mother, Mary, at some point. She's widowed. She loses her only son. And the heart of Jesus pours forth on this woman, and he raises her son from the dead. St. Augustine says this son symbolizes our sins that have come out of the mind and heart, and they're manifested in action. But they're not affecting other people yet, but they're sins on our own account. So think about that in your own life, how maybe the sinful thought patterns can lead into sinful actions in our life. Finally, I want to focus on the third one here, the story of Lazarus. So Lazarus has been dead for how long? For 4 days. 4 days. The other two, I believe it was within the first day, because they would bury somebody within 24 hours of death. And so now Jesus gets word from his friends. He's very close with Martha and Mary and Lazarus. And he gets word that one of his best friends, Lazarus, is sick. Now you would think that Jesus would do what? Immediately go, and because he knows he's the Son of God, he could heal Lazarus before he died. But he waits, right? He stays there for a couple of days, and the disciples are saying, shouldn't we go help Lazarus? And he said, this illness is not to end in death, he says, but is for the glory of God. This is really important in our lives, I think. There's times when things happen in our lives that we call it God's permissive will. God allows things to happen that we just don't understand. Eventually, at some point, and it may not even be until we see God face to face, that we will understand why God allowed things to happen. One very small experience that I had, and if you read my book, you've heard this. I was redshirted my first year. Didn't want to be redshirted. I wanted to transfer after I got redshirted. But it was in my 5th year, that never would have happened had I not been redshirted, that I had the best year of my life. I had the 6-for-6 game, the Grand Slam. All of these wonderful experiences never would have happened had I gotten my way. There's other things in life that I say, thank God I didn't get what I wanted. Thank God for unanswered prayers. And so Jesus had a plan here with his friend Lazarus, not to go right away, to know that, okay, he's not only died, but he's in the tomb for 4 days. And so Jesus arrives. He's been dead for 4 days, and who comes out running but Martha? Martha's the same one that she was busy about things in the kitchen, taking care of everyone, and Mary had sat at the feet of Jesus. But now Martha says to Jesus, and you kind of see her growing faith. She says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. She's showing faith in Jesus. But even now I know whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Like, I trust you. And so Jesus says, your brother will rise. And she says, yeah, I know he'll rise in the resurrection on the last day. Again, strong faith, but she doesn't know that Jesus is going to raise him right now. And so Jesus says this, really important. He says, I am. Remember, when Moses saw the burning bush, Moses said, who should I tell them is sending me? And God says, I am. Jesus says repeatedly in the scriptures, I am the sheep gate. I am the narrow door. I am the light of the world. I am, today he says, the resurrection. That I am is connecting himself to God. And so he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Do you believe this? This is a question for all of us today. This is why we are in this church today, because something happened over 2,000 years ago, that someone died, and 3 days he rose from the dead. That is the basis of our faith. And he says, you and I, if we believe in him, the same thing will happen to us. So, do you believe this? And Martha responds, yes, Lord, I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world. Again, you see her growing faith in Jesus. And so the Lord invites us to that deeper faith. Do we believe in the resurrection from the dead? And so they take Jesus, and what he says, where have you laid him? They take him to the tomb, and I love this. It said, and Jesus wept. If you ever think that God doesn't have compassion when we suffer, just reflect on this line. There's a beautiful church in the Holy Land where it's called Dominus Flavit, meaning, and God wept, the Lord wept. And Jesus wept over Jerusalem for their lack of faith. Here we see Jesus weeping over the death of his friend. When we lose a loved one, God is not some distant God saying, oh, too bad. No, he is weeping with us. He weeps with us in our suffering. And so they said, look how much he loved him. This was a deep, deep friendship. And so he asked them to roll away the stone. And so you can imagine Jesus thinking about his own death and resurrection, where the stone would be rolled away. And Martha said, please, Jesus, there's going to be a stench. Now, remember what St. Augustine said. Now, he says the death of Lazarus, it symbolizes our sins, not only in our mind and heart, not only sins that have come out, but also sins that affect others. And the stench starts to spread, right? He says, better if you lead one of these little ones to sin, better that a millstone be tied around your neck and you be thrown into the river. And so, to God, sin stinks. God weeps when we sin. He weeps when we die of our spiritual death. And so Jesus tells Martha, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? And again, he's saying that to us as well. Maybe when our faith is weak, he says, did I not tell you that I'm with you? Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? And so Jesus, he has this prayer to the Father, and he says, I'm only saying this so everybody hears that you sent me. And then he says, he cries out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Think about this. I've talked about this before, but it's so important. Jesus is the Word made flesh. God created the world by speaking. God spoke and the heavens were made, the earth was made, the waters were made. And so everything God says happens. John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word, who is Jesus, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So now Jesus, who is God, is walking the earth. Everything he says happens. When he changes the water, asks for the water to be changed into wine, it happens. When he says to the blind man, you can see, he can see. When he says to Lazarus, come out, he comes out. When he says at the Last Supper, this is my body and this is my blood, it's his body and blood. And so always know that Jesus says, if you believe in me, he says, I've gone to prepare a place for you, and I'm going to go and prepare that place, and I will come back for you. And he asks for our faith and to put our faith into action. So just imagine, if you saw the Chosen, this scene is so powerful. Lazarus comes out, he's still tied up, and this is symbolic of how sin binds us. Jesus says, untie him, let him go. This is like a confession where all of his sins have been forgiven and he is set free. We know that Lazarus is going to die again, right? We know that Jairus' daughter dies again. We know that the widow's son dies again. These stories, yes, they are true miracles, and Jesus is trying to say, sin separates us from God. Sin leads to this spiritual death that God weeps over our sin, and he wants us to live in communion with him, to believe in him. And so as we go through this scrutiny with our beloved elect in just a few minutes after the creed, I want us to reflect this week on those three things. Think of the raising of Jairus' daughter and how maybe our sinful thought patterns will eventually lead to actions, the death of the son of the widow. And then finally, this raising of Lazarus from the dead. Sometimes we think, how can God forgive me? I'm too far gone. There's a stench. There's no way that I can be raised from this dead. There's no way that God can forgive me. This is a story for all of us, that no matter how far we have strayed, no matter how stinky our sins have been, God says to each one of us, he calls us by name, come out, untie him, untie her. A good confession, and we are back in union with God. The stench is gone, and we are in communion with the God who loves us.